Oh my gosh. What do you look at that? The Bengals are going to a Super Bowl? Dang. Now the Chiefs are eliminated out of the AFC Championship game, which is one round earlier than usual. Last year they got... Wait a second. There's a pattern. They first start with winning the Super Bowl. Season after that, they make it to the Super Bowl, but lose there. This year, they made it to the AFC Championship and lost that. Does that mean next year they'll make it to the divisional round and lose that? And then the year after that, wild card, and then after that, not make the playoffs at all? Because there's some sort of thing going on there. But the Bengals are going to the Super Bowl. And it's not good news for me because I'm a Ravens fan. At least it's... I cannot believe Burrow actually beat the Chiefs. My prediction was wrong. I predicted the Chiefs to win that game a while ago. That was wrong. What's next? Rams versus Niners? One of them is going to play against the Bengals in the Super Bowl, I guess. But enough talk. Let's get to today's topic. World War I history. Well, that's too long. Jeez. Golden Thunder says, Odin, do you like the Giants? No, I'm a Ravens fan. But I don't really have hatred towards the Giants. I just laugh at from 2 years ago that they drafted Daniel Jones instead of Josh Allen. I don't know why they did that. The Bills would have been a whole nother team if it wasn't for them. It was 21-3.
The world of 1914, a time of modern tech.
What is he saying? Watch the oversimplified one. All of them, they're good. I want to watch some that are not so long that we don't have time to watch it all.
Technology, culture, and fashion. Truly the height of civilization. Let's have a war. Everyone knew a big war was coming. France wanted some stuff back that Germany had taken from it. Germany wanted to take more of everyone's stuff, and they were building a big sexy navy that was making the British uncomfortable.
Oh, is this something like the history of the world, I guess, kind of themed video?
These two empires thought they were really cool, but lots of different people who lived there didn't think it was so cool. And some of them had even been declaring independence with help from Russia. Everyone was talking about each other behind each other's backs, throwing the fact that military technology had come a long way since the last major war, and suddenly everyone was pretty eager to beat each other up. In this area of Austria-Hungary live some Serbs and Bosnians who hated living in Austria-Hungary. So the Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand goes there for a nice drive in an open-top car, with his car's route published in advance. And that went just about as well as you'd expect.
Started. That's how World War I all started, with an assassination. Sean says it's over a sandwich.
Some assassins were waiting for him along the way and threw bombs at his car, but they missed and blew up some officers behind him instead. So the Archduke goes into hiding, leaves Sarajevo, and the whole war never happens. Except no, the Archduke doesn't leave, but instead goes back out in the open-top car to visit the injured officers in hospital. The driver takes a wrong turn and by sheer coincidence gets stuck beside one of the failed assassins, who shoots him.
Dang.
Austria-Hungary is understandably pissed about all this, and they think the Serbian government had something to do with it, which they might have. So they go to their ally Germany and say, "Hey Germany, we're going to declare war on Serbia," and Germany is all for that. So Austria-Hungary send a big list of impossible demands to Serbia, and when Serbia refuses, they declare war. Austria-Hungary and Germany are friends, and Serbia is protected by Russia, whose friend...
We call those alliances. We don't necessarily say friends when it comes to country-wise.
With friends, so they'll declare war on each other. Montenegro joins in too. France and Britain also have a kind of alliance, so when France says, "Hey Britain, you got my back?" Britain is like, "Maybe." And then they decide to stay out of it, which is great for Germany, because Germany has a plan. They know that Russia is so big and clumsy that it will take them a while to get ready for war. So with this guy in charge, Germany will send all its troops into France at lightning speed while Russia's getting ready, defeat France, then move all the troops to Russia and defeat Russia, and then we all speak German and eat Pfefferpottast every day. Just one problem. France has loads of forts and defenses along its German border, and Germany can't waste any time fighting them, so Germany decides to go around them.
Wow.
Through Belgium.
Through Belgium? Yeah, and that's when the UK got mad, because I believe they were allies.
Belgium is neutral, but Germany wants to march 750,000 troops through it to get around France's defenses. They're hoping Belgium will just kind of sit down and shut up, but they don't. They fight back, and they're pretty good too, so they slow the Germans down. What's worse is that Britain shows up, and they're...
Yeah, exactly my point.
They pissed that Germany's invading neutral countries, so now Britain declares war on Germany. So Germany push on through Belgium and commit some atrocities along the way. They also wear spikes and sometimes skulls on their uniform. So if you're trying to not look like the bad guys, good job. The Allies have a propaganda extravaganza, and this starts having an influence around the world, notably in America. The US President Woodrow Wilson sees himself as a bit of a Jesus figure, and spends most of the war trying to get everyone to just hug it out. But there's also a large population of ethnic Germans living in the United States, and when the war first broke out, they were like, "Yay, Germany!" But now that they're committing atrocities in Belgium, they're less enthusiastic.
Yeah, they're not so happy about their own country. But it's a whole different country now.
Let's play Spot the French Soldier. Did you see him? Easy, right? He's wearing a bright blue uniform with red trousers. And do you know who else spotted him easily too? The Germans. So when the French were slowly marching in columns through the countryside, the Germans...
Why did they even choose uniforms that don't blend in very well? That's my question. There's a reason our army wears camouflage. So that of course they can literally camo and not be seen as often.
Tore them to shreds with their giant guns. All the nations involved in this war went in with an old school war mentality. And all of them had to update their
No helmet, no boots.
uniforms and tactics.
Siberia and Russia made sense in their uniforms. But for France's uniform, it's easily seen by everyone.
In the Great War. Because this war was going to be like nothing anyone had ever seen before. Russia's ready for war, and way earlier than expected. Hey, Austria-Hungary, can you get on top of that? Oh yeah, sure, we've got this. Nope. So Germany has to send some troops back to the east to defend against the Russians. The chief of staff of the Austro-Hungarian army is this guy, and although he is handsome, he turns out not to be the best military strategist. Austria-Hungary constantly ignores Germany's advice, and then comes running back to Germany whenever they get in trouble. Austria-Hungary even gets its ass kicked by tiny Serbia, who repels all their invasion attempts at the start of the war. It's better news for Germany in the north, though, where they almost completely wipe out the Russian Second Army. Back on the Western Front, the Germans continue advancing and...
Speaking of the Western Front, we were reading a book in my English class just before the semester ended called All Quiet on the Western Front, where it is literally a book about the visions of the German soldiers during World War I. And you're literally just knowing that you're going to be put into a coffin, you know you're going to die is kind of how it went there. And it turns out even the main character died at the very freaking end. Sorry if I'm spoiling the book, but I doubt most people are going to read this book. Unless if you live in Maryland where that's part of the curriculum. Oh, frick.
Are in sight of Paris. At this point, anyone would be forgiven for thinking the Germans were going to get that quick victory after all. But then things start to go wrong. The French commander-in-chief knew something had to be done, and he ordered his armies to stop retreating. In the resulting battle, a gap opened up in the German lines. If a gap opens up, the enemy can use it to flank you from the side and behind, so the German armies have to retreat. The Allies launch a counterattack, so the Germans dig into defensive position.
Yep. And that's what started the whole trench warfare. Once that started, the war really was starting to get crazy.
The Allies do the same. Then both sides move north, trying to outflank each other along the way. When they reach the sea, they're in a stalemate with trench systems running the whole way from the coast to Switzerland. The beginning of trench warfare on the Western Front. Here's how trench warfare works. Two opposing lines of trenches with no man's land in between. One side would pummel the other with hundreds of thousands of artillery shells, sometimes for days at a time. This had a huge psychological effect on the soldiers, leaving many...
Yeah, World War I is not really the war you want to go for when it comes to survival. There's times where you're not going to eat very well and you're going to be hungry. There's times where you're going to have excessive diarrhea because they give you modified rations because they run out of food. There's times where you get trench foot because of the dirt and stuff. And wetness of your feet will be 24/7. And then there's a whole list.
Shell shock. Then the attacking troops would leave their trenches and rush across no man's land. A muddy, wet mass of shell craters and barbed wire. The defending trench would unleash machine gun fire on the attackers, inflicting thousands of casualties. The attackers would send wave after wave until either they gave up or the opposing trench was finally overrun. There would be months of fighting and the deaths of thousands in order to gain a few meters or kilometers of land.
It moved.
Living in the trenches was hard work too. Corpses, mud that could swallow you whole.
Yeah, and it's chaos.
Pools of poisonous water, rats, disease.
Yeah, rats was another problem, and disease.
Smell. It's insane that millions of soldiers put up with these conditions, and commanders ordered them to do so for years.
Well, I did hear they improved it towards the end. There's a part 2?
With both sides stuck in a hard stalemate, they knew this war wasn't going to be about taking territory, but about simply wearing each other down. The Allies had plenty of men to expend from its overseas dominion.
Yeah, that's a lot of territories. Huh? What? Guess we'll do that.
And the British also started a naval blockade, so Germany couldn't import stuff, like food.
Yep, and that's what caused the Germans to starve.
The side really wanted a long, grueling war, though, so they both thought of ways to break the deadlock on the Western Front. Idea number 1, new frontiers. When the war first broke out, Australia was quick to take German New Guinea.
Wow. I did not know. See, we only learned about the main parts of the war. I didn't even know Australia was somewhat involved in World War One. The frick? Have they even been involved in many wars?
Allies also quickly jumped on Germany's colonies in Africa, and
Dang.
particularly in German East Africa, locals were enlisted as soldiers and carriers by both sides, leading to a tragic loss of life for the native Africans. Some new combatants entered the war as well. The Allies' new friends were Italy and Japan. Japan was busy building itself an empire, so it was more than happy to take away German islands and colonies in East Asia. Italy actually had an alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary before the war, but after some tense relations, and then the Allies promising to give...
Yeah? I'm gonna be right back. I'm gonna get the trash.
Kara! Go take Maverick out! I gotta pee.
Alright, I'm back. Let's continue.
From some of Austria-Hungary's stuff, they switched sides. Italy opened up a front in the mountains here, but like everyone else, they were stuck in stalemate for most of the war. The Central Powers' new friend was a struggling empire in the Middle East.
You mean the Ottoman Empire, which was split up into different regions.
The Ottoman were divided on whether to actually join the war or not, since they had been exhausted by the recent Balkan Wars. Some of the politicians who did want to join went off on their own and fired some shells at Russia, and then came back and said, whoops, looks like we're at war now. The Ottoman entry into the war was of particular concern to the British, since the Middle East was full of oil, and Britain wanted all of that oil. First, the Ottomans tried to attack Russia in the Caucasus Mountains, but they weren't prepared for the cold, and many of them froze to death.
I don't remember which one was the Napoleon War. I think that was actually before World War I, actually. Because that was France trying to invade countries like Russia, but they froze to death.
Then they crossed miles of desert to take the Suez Canal from the British, but that failed too. Then the Allies tried to take the Dardanelles at Gallipoli in a long and hard trench warfare campaign, but that also failed. The Ottomans blamed their initial losses on the ethnic Armenians living within Ottoman territory.
Seriously? That's the kind of thing the Germans did during World War II, except against the Jewish people. Except they just literally classified it for the reasons of everything. But that's when it was ruled by Hitler and made the Nazi Party. Choking on that chip that I just ate. Um,
And the resulting Armenian genocide led to the deaths of 1.5 million people. Then the Germans sent spies into Afghanistan to try to convince the Arab tribes there to rise up in jihad against the British
wow.
and attack India. But that plan failed, partly because the spies got bored, brewed their own alcohol, and got drunk.
Their own soldiers didn't even do anything.
Which is a bad thing to do in Afghanistan.
All right, we'll be right back. Gotta go to who did you say take Mav? Who did you say take out? I'm gonna go take out a dog. Who did you say to take out?
All right.
I'm trying to get Maverick some love, and he's just not happy.
They get shit out of our goddamn house. They're just taking up space.
We're not eating there yet.
All right, we're back. Let's continue.
All these new frontiers hadn't done much to change the war. Aware that the Allies had more men and supplies than them, the Germans knew they had to do something to break the stalemate. Before the war, there was a big conference that set out the rules of modern warfare. No chemical weapons, no killing civilians. Basically, don't be jerks. The Germans held a meeting and decided to be jerks. Zeppelin air raids commenced over British cities. They also...
Oh yeah, they did try to They did try to bring in a... Actually, no, wait. That was World War II. My mistake. I was talking about the planes and stuff that Germany sent out to the United Kingdom to try to destroy city after city, but Britain defended back, but that was again during World War II.
Started attacking the Allied trenches with chlorine gas, and they used submarines to sink civilian ships. One such civilian ship was the Lusitania.
And that one civilian ship was ours, as that was the United States, and that's what brought them in the war.
It had 159 Americans on board when it was sunk, further swaying U.S. opinion against the Germans. Not to be completely unfair to the Germans, the Allies also engaged in chemical warfare soon after, and they had been hiding anti-submarine weapons on their civilian ships, which let the Germans justify their attacks. Meanwhile, Austria-Hungary still hadn't dealt with, so the Central Powers enlisted some help. Bulgaria wished it was bigger and was still bitter about losing the Second Balkan War. The Central Powers promised to make all of Bulgaria's wildest dreams come true if they helped, so they signed on, and together they knocked out Serbia. The Serbian troops retreated through Albania, which was neutral but had some ties to Austria-Hungary. So Austria-Hungary entered Albania in a friendly invasion to chase down the Serbians, many of whom escaped by sea. It's 1916, and a lot is happening. As if they didn't have enough enemies already,
Yeah.
Germany added one more to the list. Portugal had been getting a bit chummy with the Allies behind the scenes, and Germany didn't like that one bit. Around this
Where's Ukraine? I don't know what Ukraine's done during this war.
Battle of the war happened. Both sides had a new powerful class of battleships called dreadnoughts, but they were so expensive to build that neither side wanted to risk losing them in a battle. So they kept them in port, except for one time when they had a big fight and a bunch of them got damaged, so they didn't try that again. The UK started conscripting men to the army, so they had plenty of reserves, which is just as well because the Western Front was about to get brutal. The longest and one of the bloodiest battles of the war started when the Germans launched an attack around the French city of Verdun. The French defended it desperately, leading to hundreds of thousands of casualties. Under pressure, the French called on its allies to do something to draw the Germans' attention away, so the British started their own long and brutal fight. The Battle of the Somme, with 60,000 British casualties on just the first day. It was also here that the British first used one crazy brand new piece of sci-fi technology.
Tanks.
The Russians had been getting pushed back further and further into their own territory, but in response to the French call for help, they began a huge offensive, and did really well until they ran out of supplies and got stuck. Seeing how well the Russians had been doing, Romania decided now would be a great time to jump in and win the war, and then they got pounded.
Dang. It's a big war.
The Greeks were fighting amongst themselves about whether to join the war or not. The king liked the Central Powers, while the Prime Minister wanted to join the Allies. After a brief national schism, during which the country split into two, the king finally abdicated, and the country... Brief national schism, during which the country split into two, the king finally abdicated and the country reunited. With Allied help, they began a new offensive. In the Middle East, Russia was pushing into Ottoman territory from the north. The British had also made a landing in Mesopotamia to protect Persia's oil fields, and they had also sent a small army up the Tigris River to try to take Baghdad. But the army got sieged in the town of Kut along the way, and eventually surrendered. A new offensive was launched from the south with all-out desert warfare. The offensive was aided by one famous British officer, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, who helped lead the Arab tribes in a revolt that wreaked havoc on the Ottoman supply lines. By the time 1917 rolled around, everyone was...
Oh, and also heads up, the Rams and Niners game has started. One of them will play against the Bengals in the Super Bowl, as we have 3 teams remaining right now.
Exhausted. There were mutinies in the French army, the German populace was starving, and the war had drained all of Russia's supplies. There was no clear winner, and it was still anyone's war. The only question now was, who was going to break first? And the answer was Russia. Tired of not eating, and mad that a crazy magic homeless guy was calling some of the shots, there was an uprising in Petrograd, complete with riots and strikes. The riots turned into a full-scale revolution, and a
The
new
Russian
government...
Revolution. It was chaos.
Then a few months later, the Bolsheviks overthrew the new government. And they pulled Russia. Later, the Bolsheviks the riots and strikes. The riots turned into a full-scale revolution, and a new government overthrew the Tsar. Then a few months later, the Bolsheviks overthrew the new government.
Yeah, chaos in Russia. And it's still communism. It's still a communist country as of right now. And as of this day, they're now trying to invade Ukraine because Ukraine wants to join the NATO, which I think is a stupid reason to invade a country. But you know how communist works.
and they pulled Russia out of the war. This was great news for Germany, who now only had to focus on the Western Front. But there was still one problem. The pesky United States of America was looking increasingly like it was going to join the war. America had been selling supplies to the Allies throughout the war and was getting super rich off the back of it. It was in fantastic shape and was dangerous to the Germans. So Germany sent a telegram to Mexico saying, wouldn't it be crazy?
Yeah, this is what literally made it official that U.S. joined the war. That note for Mexico to take over the United States is literally what brought the U.S. in the war, because stuff like that doesn't fly around here.
America, but the British intercepted the message, showed it to the Americans.
Yeah, it was intercepted by them.
And that was the final straw. American troops began shipping out to
And
Europe.
that's when Germany really fricked up. That's when Germany in World War I really fricked up. And now they're getting beaten by...
This was terrible news for Germany, and they knew that.
And literally got destroyed.
The only hope now was to force France and the UK to surrender before the fresh American troops arrived. It was now or never, so they started one final attack. They converged their troops and hit hard at the Somme and pushed the Allies back. They hit a second time further north, then again and again. With each hit, the Germans were spending more and more resources, while the Allies were getting better and better at repelling their attacks. By the fifth punch, the Allies held the line and even pushed back. With American troops now arriving in larger numbers, the Allies launched a counterattack, and that was it. The Central Powers were being pushed back on all fronts. Bulgaria collapsed first, followed by the Ottoman Empire, then Austria-Hungary, and finally on November 11th, 1918, at 11 o'clock, Germany surrendered. At the peace treaty, Germany was forced to reduce its military, accept war guilt, and pay the bill for the war. After indescribable suffering and millions dead, the world learned its lesson and never had such an awful war again. For about 20 years.
Yeah, until the Second World War. Now, we're not going to get into World War II in this episode because that's for another viewer's choice episode. Hopefully we don't end up starting a World War III, though. So yeah, let's see what other ones are.
Craving comfort food? Try Wawa's warm and savory barbecue brisket, made from the finest cuts of...
100 years ago ended a war whose intensity and scale the world had never before seen. A war that involved more than 60 million soldiers around the globe. In this video, we retrace the origins, events, and consequences of World War I.
Yeah, there's been millions of wars, or tons of wars that's been going on in this country. Well, in the entire world, not just our country, but the entire world.
To understand the origins of World War I, we start in 1871, at the end of the Franco-German War between the French Empire and the Confederation of North Germany, allied with the German states of the South. After 6 months of fighting, France is defeated, and the victors unite to form the German Empire. Alsace and Moselle are annexed to the new empire, frustrating the French side.
Yeah, that's how that went.
In the following years, Germany would greatly advance its industry and economy. The country also builds alliances, first with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then with Italy, which is frustrated by France colonizing Tunisia. The three form the triple...
I don't get why taking a country makes people mad. I don't understand why.
Germany begins to form the Triplice or Triple Alliance. Growing in power and status, Germany begins colonizing African territories. For its part, France allies with the Russian Empire and signs a secret pact of non-aggression with Italy, thus avoiding a second front in case of war. The British Empire fears the rise of the German army, more specifically of its navy. Britain comes out of isolation, moves closer to France, and then to Russia. Together, they form the Triple Entente.
Yeah, those are just the 3 main countries. If we saw in the last video, there was a bunch of them. A bunch more in what we had,
In
just
the
the main
Balkans,
6.
the Austro-Hungarian Empire annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina, much to the displeasure of neighboring Serbia, which dreamed of one day uniting the South Slav people. This project appeals to Russia, which diplomatically allies itself with Serbia. On June 29, 1914, a young Serbian nationalist from Bosnia murders the heir to the throne of Austria and his wife in Sarajevo. Austria-Hungary accuses Serbia of having organized the attack and, despite Russian threats, declares war the following month. In a few days, the conflict spreads between the countries of the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance. Only Italy remains neutral for the moment.
Yeah.
The German plan is to overcome the French army concentrated in the east by planning an attack from the north. To achieve this,
They would have to go through Belgium. And that's what, again, set off the UK.
invades Luxembourg and Belgium in violation of their neutrality in the conflicts. The French, British, and Belgian armies are forced to retreat. Fearing the capture of Paris, the French government moves to Bordeaux. But the German army turns away from the city to continue surrounding the French army. They are then attacked on the flanks by the army of Paris, which forces them to retreat further north, marking the failure of the Schlieffen Plan. The new German objective is to take over the strategic ports of Calais, Dunkirk, and Boulogne to cut British supplies. The inferior Belgian army cannot resist the German advance. In the plain of Yser, the choice is then made to open lock gates to flood the polders. With the German army stopped in their tracks, the front line is edged out with the construction of 700 kilometers of trenches, stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland.
Yeah, and then there's a whole bunch of other fronts. There's some minor battles in this war as well. Again, with Australia versus German New Guinea. Or whatever it was called.
I'm good, Mom. Thanks.
The African battles against the German countries. Yeah, all kinds of stuff. Okay.
With the war front lines stabilized in the west, Germany sent its troops to the east to fight against a Russian offensive, which puts pressure on Austria-Hungary. After some hesitation, the Ottoman Empire decides to support Germany in the war. This creates...
Wait. Wait. They look completely different areas in 2 different videos. That doesn't... I don't know if this is accurate or not.
several new fronts. One in the Caucasus, another in the Sinai against the British Protectorate in Egypt with the goal of controlling the Suez Canal, and finally a third front in the British Protectorate of Kuwait over the issue of oil resources. To weaken the Ottoman Empire, Britain supports an Arab rebellion by promising them independence in liberated lands. Finally, Italy declares war on Austria-Hungary with the hope of gaining new territory.
Internationalization.
In Asia, Japan went to war against Germany and seized its colonies in the Pacific and China.
Yeah, Japan did that too.
In Africa, German colonies are stormed by French, British, and Belgian forces. Many people from colonized territories are enlisted in European armies. France mobilizes nearly 800,000 people, a large proportion of whom are sent to Europe. The British Empire, for its part, enlists 2.7 million men from its dominions and colonies. More than half come from British India.
Yeah, as you can see, most of the countries were involved in the war, except for majority of the countries in South America. I don't know. Most of the countries in South America hasn't really been in a war. I don't remember Brazil being in a war with anything. But who knows? With the way history's going on right now with the Ukraine bullcrap and Russia, that could change.
Yeah, we probably don't have much time left.
In the Balkans, Bulgaria goes back to war alongside the Central Empires. The country has a great territory and wants to expand in all directions. Serbia is attacked on two fronts and is quickly invaded. In the West, Germany continues with military innovations. It becomes the first to organize aerial bombardments carried out by Zeppelin airships.
Yeah.
London and Paris are regularly attacked. The Air Force is initially used for tracking and reconnaissance, but planes are quickly fitted out with machine guns, resulting in the first aerial battles. In another first, Germany launches submarine wars in British territorial waters, sinking ships it encounters.
Including American ships, which then brought... Well, it's not what started them in the war, but it made the U.S. agitated. But what really started it is when they sent that message that was intercepted by the British. And then the British sent it to us. And it turns out they wanted Mexico to invade the United States. So that they would take their territory back, which their old territory was the little bit of the South, like New Mexico, Texas, and all the southern border states of our country. If any of these battles were if history was altered in some ways, especially if the interception wasn't made, I could be speaking Spanish right now.
Huh?
Because who knows? Well, then again, the United States would have probably won that war, actually, if the U.S. and Mexico were to go at war during World War I. But there's millions of possibilities.
Finally, in the trenches, both sides use toxic gases that cause many casualties.
Such as mustard gas, which I think that was World War II, actually. No, that was World War I. That was World War I. Then you have the gas that makes your lungs burn until you die.
Wait, what are you talking about?
I don't know what the gas was called.
What, the gas that makes your lungs burn?
Yeah.
I think it's mustard gas, I think.
No, not that one. It makes it burn instantly.
It's not common. Uncle Brad is trying to watch his football.
Despite some attempts to find breakthroughs, the front lines of war remain fixed, at great human cost. In the trenches, soldiers who survive the fighting are forced to live in harsh conditions. Mud, vermin, rats, and the smell of decaying corpses put their nerves to the test. In the spring, the French side begins mutinies that would be suppressed. Germany also tires of the stalemate. The country is now focused on war on the economic front and sends its submarines to the Atlantic to sink all kinds of ships, even commercial ones, heading to the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
Exhausted by war, Russia suffers more than 1.7 million military casualties. Morale is at its lowest point on the front lines and among the public. Then takes place a short revolution that brings down the regime of the Tsars. At the same time, the United States of America finds itself becoming a victim of the commercial blockade in the Atlantic. They decide to
Yeah.
go to war alongside the Allies.
I'm surprised they didn't mention the again the message to Mexico that stated them to invade the United States. As again, that was intercepted by the British. The British showed it to the U.S. And that's how the U.S. entered World War One.
In Russia, a second revolution
Mexico. And it didn't work.
Yeah, it got intercepted in the meantime.
allows the Bolsheviks to come to power, who immediately sign a ceasefire with the Central Empires.
And then you got the end. This will be the last video we watch because we're going to go back to Minecraft in a minute.
With the Russian front under control, Germany concentrates its troops on the west. The country succeeds in a breakthrough in the trenches and a
Speaking of war, I think there's been one major war that's happened in Golden SMP so far. It's between the Pickle Empire and the Poto Empire, which it's called now. And sadly, we lost that war. But that was mainly because I was offline most of the time because I was busy.
approaches Paris, which it bombards. But the German army moves too fast to the south. The French army counterattacks and disintegrates German defenses. In panic, German soldiers retreat to the north.
I mean, if you want to, you can. You would just need to find a space. You can either build as an expansion to our empire, the other empires, Zen's stupid empire that's very small.
I want to make the British Empire.
Or you can again start your own empire, which is what she's looking into now. So we're probably gonna have 4 different nations now.
I'm gonna make the British Empire. I'm gonna make the British Empire.
The Poto Empire has a bunch of people involved in it. We have me, Golden, and Blinks, and I think Blue as well.
Then what's the other empire?
The other empire, you got the Pickle Empire, which has Gator, Ninja. Their empire is weird because they charge people to enter. One time when I was visiting before we became enemies, I got killed just for entering their territory. Even though I was visiting them under curiosity.
Well, the British Empire ain't gonna be.
Yeah, the Pickle Empire is the only nation that does that. Zen's tiny empire is literally just one tiny area. Then you got Fire. I think he was part of...
Is it possible to live in 2 empires?
I mean, you could if you're allies with them. So...
From this moment, the Allies lead on all fronts. In Germany, mutinies and a revolutionary wave force the emperor to abdicate and allows the signing of the armistice, marking the end of the Great War that kills more than 18 million people. On June...
Yeah, we're gonna go ahead and look on Discord now to see where the regions are. I know there's a bunch of them. Yeah, here they are. The Poto Empire. Actually, there's more empires, actually, that I forgot to mention. The Flower Empire is controlled by Blinks, which is allied with the Poto Empire, and the Uwu Empire, which is controlled by Golden. I don't know how my territory got so big. I didn't even attempt to raid that much space. But I practically own most of the woods. And Golden wants me to take over some land across the river as well, which will I probably should do that just to make the Pickle Empire mad. I don't know where this is, but that should be territory as well by Flower. Then again, you got the Pickle Empire, which is literally now looks like it's taken over. Then you got Ned. I don't know what the Ned Empire is. It's just a bunch of tiny houses. This is, I think, Fire's or Zen's tiny area.
You know what? I am officially making my own empire.
And it's going to look like there's going to be another empire that's going to join in this as well.
Called the Roman Empire.
Like it's going to be the Roman Empire.
And I'm the emperor.
So yeah, us three, the Flower, Ooh, and Poto are, I guess, are all allies. So that's good news. I somehow control the most land, but that's because I seized this village, which was neutral, which wasn't conquered by anyone. The South, I don't know how I got it.